and I'm sitting next to you.
So we're all on the same side.
We're all, I'm going to move back over. But we should be live right now. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Celestine. I got Miguel Lopez. Am I pronouncing that right? Yeah, that's right. And I've got Lance on. A year and a half. And today we're actually covering off common data service. Super exciting for the Power BI folks. We're going to show you some Power Query integration and some of the other new features that are out like make it happen. And of course, if you've got questions, please type them in the window. I'm not otherwise, at the end of each person's session, we'll go ahead and ask it. Hans and Nora, I want to thank you very much for inviting the from musical. I think we have 50 other people online, so I'm pretty good.
Very good. Thank you very much. So I'm Lance Delano. I am from the Common Data Service team, and been working on a feature that some of you may have seen already, which is data integration. And I'm here today with Miguel, and we're going to talk a little bit about getting data into CDS. And the data integration work that we've done so far brings data into the Common Data Service. But one of the new exciting things we're going to be doing is joining up with Power Query functionality to make that process much more useful beyond just simple integration between, say, Dynamics 365 for sales and Dynamics 365 for and finance for operations enterprise edition. This is the new very, very long name. So Kim Nelson is noting that she cannot hear us.
So I assume we've got several acknowledgements. We've got one of Eldra, we've got Brian Dane, and they all and Cameron. They all say they can hear you fine. So Kim may need to reconnect, and also YouTube does a great job of down leveling or reducing the encoding level. So it may be a network problem on Kim's side.
Okay, all right. Okay, so anyway, so today we'll talk a little bit about the principles and the goals of data integration generally, and what we're trying to accomplish with that project. Some of you may not have seen the data integrator yet at all, so we'll go through a discussion around that. And the role between the data integrator and CDS and what we're trying to accomplish there. And we'll do a demo, we'll walk through some of the features. We won't do a full integration today, but you'll get a sense for previous integrations and how they've worked and what the features are and how you can work with them. And then we'll have a pointer to how things will work when we have Power Query and that functionality joined in, and that's what Miguel will show. So that's our agenda for today. So let's start off, and let's start with a problem that if you're working exclusively with the Common Data Service, you may not be fully familiar with, but if you are a Dynamics customer, you probably are, which is that we've had these products for many years in the Dynamics space. We've had what's been called CRM is now called Dynamics 365 for sales, and we've had what was previously called AX, and is now called Dynamics 365 for Finance Operations and Finance Enterprise Edition. And we have other products as well. And we announced this brand, Dynamics 365, which is an umbrella brand. It brings all of these products together under a single marketing effort. And one of the first questions customers ask, and have been asking for many times, is, but when we announced it, was now they're going to work together. And so they are. And so you can see here on the right that some of the number of services that we have together that we want to get to work together. And the way that we're going to enable them working together is through a scenario kind of focus. So a good example of that is, for instance, if I have Dynamics 365 for sales, and I might, for instance, contact somebody and I want to put them in as an account or a lead. And similarly, if I have in Dynamics for operations, which I'm simply going to call it operations. If I have something in operations, if I've defined a product, for instance, that I want to make available to create sales orders with, I'd like these two products to share this entity information across each other. And so what we're going to do is enable that sharing to take place, but also allow a copy of that data, that master data, to show up in the common data service. But the scenario is, to finish out the scenario, I want to share this information between two systems so that when I go to create a sales order in Dynamics Sales 365 for sales, I can take advantage of products that have been defined in operations. And similarly, once I create that sales order and it pushes over into operations, and I want to create an invoice, I have a customer that was previously defined in sales. And so then the sharing information allows a business scenario. And this business scenario we call prospect cache. So what we're going to do is enable the working together of these products across through a series of scenarios, enable them across both products. And we're going to go after what we call common work patterns. So even in the example that I just talked about, which is prospect cache, there are variations in businesses in terms of how they actually get this done. So for instance, in some businesses, I might take the lead and I might create a quote because I don't have quite enough information to actually book the sales order proper, but I can give a quote. I push that over to the operations side of the world where where the information gets filled out to fill out a proper sales order. And so for instance, if I was a custom made to order furniture company, for instance, and so I can give a quote for about how much it's going to make to do a custom bookcase. But actually, as I push that information, the quote over into operations, and as I do the work, sales order gets filled out with a lot of very fine-grained detail, and then I push it back over into sales so that the salesperson can see the actual sales invoice as it's ready and the invoice when it comes forward. Call that a back office scenario where the sales order is actually filled out in detail on the operations side. Conversely, other businesses might do it differently, which is the salesperson has enough information to close the sales order with all of the detail at the time of sale. And they have the ability to sell the product, calculate the tax, and calculate the freight, and it just pushes that information over into operations and they're done. So even within prospect to cash, you can have variation. For instance, you can have a front office sales approach, and you can have a back office sales approach. But the key point is that it is common work patterns that we want to enable, and we're going to work along a path of priority order, prospect to cash, field service, and then project. So another key point is it might sort of become obvious as I've been talking about it. These things need to be customizable. So the way that we're going to be doing this is that Microsoft is going to provide a series of templates that are predefined templates, for instance, for sales order, and they can be easily extended. So you might have added some custom attributes in operations or in finance. You want those to flow in addition to whatever we might have defined. You can define your own templates to move entities that we don't know about. And then they need to be easily administered so that you can kind of see what's going on. And here on the right, you can see an example of a project where you can define the mappings between things. And we're going to talk a little bit about filtering in a minute. So this is a more detailed example of prospect cache, some of the specific entities that are involved. So you can see on the top, we have Dynamics 365 for sales. And then down on the bottom, we have 365 for operations, the formal name now being Operations and Finance Enterprise Edition. And on the top, we have lead, opportunity, and quote that are being authored. And that turns out that account and contact then are authored or mastered in sales, and they get pushed down through the CDS. Now, it's not a simple entity, simply account or contact. When account and contact come, there's a bunch of additional information that we bring along with it. So there's the customer, there's the contact, there's the address, for instance, as well, that comes along. Unit of measure, etc. Currency comes when we bring in, for instance, product. So when we bring product up, we have product, we have unit of measure, price, currency, so on and so forth. So there's a lot more when I talk about it being counter contact. There's a whole bunch of other information that kind of moves along as well. But as you can see in this picture, as we're doing the integration, we're dropping the data off in the common data service. And the reason we do that, and this comes to the point of getting data into the common data service, the reason we do that is so that when you go to create an application in the Common Data Service, if you want to create an application that has a lookup table of customer or contact or address or product or price or whatever, it's just right there. So when you go to create the form, you can create a little table. Let's say I was going to keep track of incidents, workplace incidents, things that happen around the place. Here, there's an accident. I could take a picture of it, could put it in the description of the incident. And because the master data that's already there, workplace, employee, it's all right there. Those are lookup tables. You can point to them, and you have an application in just minutes. So as we drop data off in the Common Data Service, it becomes a place where you can really easily build applications. So this is one of the key ways in which we'll be getting data into the Common Data Service. Okay, so then you can see the rest of the flow. As we move along, both account and contact are shared between each other. And in the world that we've enabled to begin with, this first world that we've enabled, you can think of the data as being primarily authored or mastered in one or the other system. So in this case, account and contact is mastered in sales. It becomes read-only down in operations. And similarly, product is authored or mastered in operations, and then it's a read-only experience in sales. And then as you go through, depending on whether you're a front office or a back office scenario, sales orders in this case is authored in operations. Order is mastered up here at the top. This is the front office. It's ordered at the top. You see that big blue box here, order and product for master for sales. Push down, and then it becomes active down here, and then invoice is what pushes back up. So this is a front office scenario. But the key characteristic of how we're doing this to begin with is enabling basically a data sync. Later on, we'll talk about some features where we'll be doing multi-master sync and some others as well. But this is our first step.
So before you go on there, Ron Alvarado, there you go, was asking, what's the licensing restrictions to actually use the integrator to do that mapping? Is it a Power Apps Premium, or who can use those features?
Great question. So right now, the data integrator comes for free with a Dynamics 365 license to either Operations for Finance and Enterprise Edition or Sales. Either one, you will get the data integrator. It'll show up in the Power Apps admin portal. The piece that we're going to be showing here with Miguel a little bit is we'll be bringing the data integrator into the Common Data Service proper as well in the Maker portal. So right now it's only in the admin portal. The plan is to bring it into the Maker portal as well, where you can bring in data from almost any data source, as many data sources as Power Query points to. So in that world, I think the licensing will be a little bit different. It'll probably just be a Common Data Service license. And if you don't have Dynamics, it's just not one of your data sources. So in terms of progression of features, data synchronization, this is what I just kind of been talking about, and I'm going to give you a quick 5-minute demo of in a few moments. We're bringing in the rich query and filtering via Power Query. And we actually already use M, which is the underlying language in Power Query today as part of our data integration project. So it's really about enabling the UI over the M that we use to run the queries. Process synchronization is coming. More direct updates that won't directly require sync. They'll just do them. That's kind of the multi-master world. And then more apps built directly on top of CDS. In fact, all new Dynamics applications are supposed to be built directly on the CDS. So with that, I'm going to kind of get into, show you just a little quick tour of the integrator. So we'll start actually here, which is in Power Apps Maker portal. The way this works is that you first create a connection here in Power Apps Maker. So you can see I have a couple of connections here, one to Dynamics 365, two of them to Dynamics 365, two different instances actually. And then I have one to operations as well. Once you've created a set of connections here, then they're available here when you go to create a data integration project. And the way you start is you create something called a connection set. And that allows you, I can kind of bring that up right here to get a sense for it. have enough time to go through, but I could say my new connection set. Oops, I need no spaces right now. Those are not. And I can choose a connection, and if it's been previously provisioned, here I have going into sales. Then I can choose an environment. I only have one environment that's available to me here. I can choose my common data source environment, in this case, which is Sales Store 2. And then I can pick up operations, for instance. You can see I have a whole bunch of environments here. And the one I was trying, this is why that thing wasn't working earlier, it's gone. And then what we do is we allow you to map business units. So in Dynamics, both in operations and sales, we have the concept of a business unit, although the terms are slightly different. In Dynamics, you have business units and you have an org, and the org corresponds generally to the instance that you have. In the common data service, we have organizations, and in operations, we have legal entities. So an example here, for instance, you could have DI001, you could have org 001, which is a business unit in common data service. And here's a legal entity showing up, which is USMF, which is a legal entity that's in operations. I'm going to cancel this. So this is the same thing that I'd created here. And then you can go ahead and create a project. And as I've mentioned, there's a whole bunch of predefined templates that you can choose from. My new project. And you can see here I could just synchronize sales. I could synchronize just into the common data service. I could do, that's just going one hop. I can do some that goes across all three. I have down here, I can see I have the sales quotes, so on and so forth. So I can go ahead and create these. I'm going to cancel this right now and just kind of show you what this looks like here. This is a project that was created that takes information from sales accounts into CDS account, into finance and ops customers V2. And then I'm going to look now at the mapping between these. And here in the mapping, you can see here we're mapping between the source and the common data service. And we say, okay, I need this field from my source to map to this field here in the middle. And then if I have some set of transforms, so for instance, we do some, here's some transforms right here. Now these transforms will go away in time, actually, once we push Power Query in. And all of these transforms should take place inside of Power Query. So let's see. So then once I have the mapping for the leg from source to CDS, and then I have the mapping from CDS into the destination, and then I can go ahead, of course, and I can remove them, or I can, down at the bottom, I can add new ones. So that if I have custom attributes that are in either system, I can map to those. And very quickly now, once I have a project and I have run it, let me, first of all, the point here is that I can schedule it to run, so I can have it run on a recurring schedule. Let's go back to execution history. You can see these that have run previously. Here I have 210 upserts that took place with no errors. And that's always the first leg ran fine. Going into AX, there were some issues, but I can easily see what the issues were. So in here, I can see that one of my mappings was not right. I can see that this is kind of slowly catching up to me. I can see that the mapping was not right. So I get a detailed set of errors as to what was actually going wrong, and I can go ahead and deal with those. Then finally, what I can do is I can just go ahead and say new project, and excuse me, I meant to go in here. If I have an existing project, I can add a new task to this, an additional entity. I can choose some other entity that maybe I want to map that I I just picked something here random that I want to have be part of my project. And then I have to go through all the work of adding this in. And I'm going to add this briefly. And I'm going to bring it back to, so now this is part of my project. And when I run this, it'll first synchronize accounts, and then it will sync my additional entity, which in this case is this. Let's briefly go back here, because this is the handoff point for you to understand what we're actually going to be doing with Power Query. So when I bring data in to, from the source into CDS, I have this list of columns right here, but I might want to filter the data as it comes in. Or I might want to do some other kind of crazy transforms. So I might want to bring it in, I might want to do a calculated column, I might want to do a join, I might want to, I do some transforms down here, but I could do them all inside of Power Query. This is a mapping basically between various countries. Right now, we're going to go to the 2-letter version of it. But we only have a simple set of transforms right here. And this is where Power Query would come into play. You can imagine that to the right here, either I have something that says advanced query and filtering, or I have another tab so I can flip back and forth between this view and the view that allows me to see the data. We're still kind of working through how that works. But this is kind of the natural place where we hand off Power Query, and which I'm going to hand off here to Miguel. But the key thing to understand is that once Power Query comes in, the set of the kind of data that you can get into the CDS will expand to the set of data sources that Miguel's team makes available via Power Query.
Before you hand off, did you want to take the questions that were asked?
Sure.
Okay. So Juan Alvarez was saying you showed a couple templates.
Yes.
During your demo. What templates are you guys looking to do in the near future? Do you have anything in store for him?
Yeah. So when we released a couple of weeks ago, formally we released accounts and products GA, and now we released Host in preview.
Okay.
So hopefully the next day or two we're going to be releasing sales order as GA or preview. Actually, that's coming from sales. That's coming from operations into CRM. That's a back office sales order story. We'll be doing the front office as well in the next week or two. Invoice will shortly follow, hopefully in the next day or two as well. So sales order and invoice here in the next couple of days is the plan. And then sales order front office coming shortly as well. And then contacts. So the next couple of weeks.
And Milker223, I think is actually what his name was asking, how do I create environments for operations? I don't know if that is different for operations than it is for Power Apps, or?
Yeah, I think he's asking how to. So that's how you create a dynamics instance, I think is that question, or an environment for it.
He actually used the word environment.
Yeah, so an environment is an instance of, so if you have an instance of Dynamics 365 for operations, you have that is an environment.
Okay.
So if you look at, very briefly, if we kind of come back here before we hand off, if you look at, let's see, I want to go back here. If I go to connection sets, and if you look here, you see this this URL right here. This URL, which is your environment, quote unquote, is the same as your instance name in operations. If you look at the top when you go to operations, if you look at the URL that is at the top, that's this instance name.
I think that answers it. I think my microphone's turned off so they can't hear me. So Miguel, why don't you go ahead and go? And you need to turn your microphone on, and you need to turn yours off, if I could.
Sounds good. So I think I am good now, and you should be seeing my PowerPoint screen, hopefully. So let's spend a few minutes talking about Power Query in the context of loading data into CDS. Before actually going into the technology solution, let's talk a little bit about the problem, the real world problem with data acquisition. And in my perspective, this is actually not far different from what it is in the context of data analytics and BI analytics. So the data acquisition challenges of whether you're trying to load data into, let's say, Power BI for building a report, or CDS for actually populating entities into the common data service. Some of these challenges, you're probably very familiar with them if you've been working on data acquisition and data analytics projects, is that connecting to data is difficult. There's many different data sources out there to connect to. Each of them might probably require a different skill set for understanding the tools to query those systems. Even in some cases, you might actually have to learn query languages. So think things like T-SQL, things like the Salesforce query language, or Spark, and some of the other languages and dialects out there. Front. Secondly, if you actually have user experiences or UIs that allow you to kind of have a query building experience on top of a specific data source, in most cases, those experiences are different across data sources. So you probably use a different tool to query SQL Server than you use to actually query data sitting on Spark, or maybe even just extracting data from a CSV file. They're very disjoint experiences. It requires users to actually learn and ramp up with many different tools to actually become successful with their extraction of data. The third point, of course, once you're able to actually connect to that data, it's probably not in the shape that you need for actually solving a specific problem that you're going after. You're probably querying a very generic table, let's say something like customers data, but you're probably going after a very specific view on top of that data set that you'll have to prepare and reshape, and maybe even apply filtering to narrow down the set of customers that you're looking at. So, there's many ceremony around that. And to make things worse, most of the times when you apply this type of shaping tasks and you need to repeat them over time, there's no easy way to automate this. So the typical example here would be someone extracting data every week and having to perform 10, 12 additional data reshaping steps sequentially and manually every time that they want to get fresher data for their analysis or repopulate a specific target system with that data. Hey guys, nice to see you.
Sorry about that.
Okay, so far we've talked about complexity in actually finding data and connecting to that data, getting the data in the shape you want, and being able to make that a repeatable task, automated task as well. But the thing gets even worse and more complex when you actually have to bring data together across many of these or multiple of these systems. Think about combining data into a single view or a single entity from a SQL Server table with a table coming from Spark with some data from a text file or an Excel spreadsheet, something like that. It's hard because then suddenly you need to figure out different challenges like, as called out here, the 3 V's of the data. So the differences in data volumes across these data sources, the velocity of the change on this data. So thinking about that scenario with those 3 sources, maybe one of the sources gets updated every minute, another source it's only changing every 3 months, and the other one maybe changes a couple times per day. So how you actually combine all of that data together, accounting for the differences in the velocity of change on the data, the different volumes, and ultimately the variety, which comes back to the variety of data formats, data source formats, and then all of the different technologies and capabilities out there for querying each of these systems. So with all of those challenges in mind, let's think a little bit about the solutions. Power Query, many of you will probably be very familiar with it coming from a BI background, is the shared technology that we expose for data connectivity and preparation that basically empowers all of the Microsoft BI products to extract data and combine data and analyze data. That includes Excel with the various versions, 2010, 2013 as the Power Query add-in. In 2016, we have inbox integration through the data tab in Excel, Power BI with Power BI Desktop being the main report authoring tool where you actually leverage the Power Query data prep and data connectivity capabilities, and analysis services in the latest version of SQL Server, SQL Server 2017. You actually have the Power Query experience being the modern new get data experience within SQL Server developer tools for building analysis services tabular models. So, but what does it actually provide? So Power Query provides, first, a connectivity to a wide range of data sources. difference in the number of data sources exposed in each of these hosts products that I mentioned, but overall we support roughly about 75 plus data sources, including generic interfaces. So things like ODBC, OLEDB, OData, REST APIs. So things that even though the data source that you might be trying to connect to is not called out as a top or first-class connector, out-of-the-box connector, you might actually be able to connect and extract data from those sources via one of these generic interfaces. The experience that we provide in order to define and build those queries to reshape and filter data is actually UX-based. It's point and click based on preview of the data. It's actually also based on a subset of the data, so that's an important point here. It doesn't really matter if you're trying to extract data from a table that has 200 rows versus 200 million rows. Operate in the design phase on a subset of the data, usually the top n rows, where n is somewhere between 200 and 1,000 or 2,000, depending on the type of operations you're doing. But it gives you enough of a preview of the data rows that it helps the users understand what's the overall schema on those tables and what kind of operations need to be applied in terms of cleaning up columns, altering the schema, maybe applying filters to exclude some of the rows themselves. And most importantly, all of these operations that are defined through the user experience, they actually get translated to an underlying query language. It's called the M language. The M language, in some cases, you'll probably want to go and tweak some things, but the user experience that we've built is mostly geared towards allowing you to do a high percentage, 80%, 90% of the things through the UI without requiring you to learn that new language. But what gets interesting is that off of that query language, the M, at runtime, we actually try and push down as many operations as we can to the underlying data sources. So for example, if you were querying through Power Query a table with customers' data coming out of SQL Server, and you were applying a filter to, let's say, filter down the customers by the country, with country being a column, and you decide to say, well, country has to be equals United States. That would get translated into M, and when M gets run, the M engine would actually be smart enough to realize that it can actually translate that filter to the underlying T-SQL filter statement, so that it will actually do that and push down the execution. We also do this with many other backends, not just SQL. And we also do this even in cases where you're querying across multiple backends. So even in cases where you might be querying data out of SQL and Oracle and maybe doing a join, Power Query will figure out an optimized plan so that it actually be able to push down executions of that query across these two systems, and even send data between them to actually do the right smart subsetting and cross-filtering.
Now, Megan had a question on that. Did you want to take Megan's question now? Or
sure, let's take it.
So Megan was saying that CDS is now a live connection when she actually connects to that data and she starts doing the interrogation. So let's go ahead and read her question. So when she gets data from CDS and another from CDS, there's a live connection. So she can't do a mashup between the different disparate data sources. Is that something that's coming, or is there a different tactic for that?
Okay, so the question is, there is some data that somehow you have already loaded into CDS. You're trying to use Power BI Desktop in this case to connect to that table of data and do some analysis or build some report on top. And currently the CDS connector in Power BI Desktop exposes only a live connection, which means you can only basically build visualizations on top rather than being able to further transform and augment the data set itself.
It's direct query.
It's live AS, I think, what it is.
Okay.
It's that experience. Okay. So, and the question is there a plan to add more of an import mode support or something that would allow you to combine the data? Lance, do you know if there's plans to actually extend that CDS connector to also include import?
I don't know. I don't know for sure. I know that there are some plans that they're talking about for how CDS works with the AS, but I don't know the specifics. There are some changes coming, but I don't know what they are.
I see. So in terms of workaround, one way I can see you might be able to do something, but it might not work actually for your specific scenario, is that with the capabilities that I'm going to show in the demo today and that we actually have available for preview, you're going to be able to use Power Query in the previous phase to actually get data into CDS. So if the type of data combination and mashups that you're trying to apply are something that you think would be a good fit for being done before loading into CDS, so that then the end users just continue using that live AS-like connection on top of CDS, that might work. Now I can see why you'd probably want to keep that to be more of a last mile data combination, because it might change for specific use cases off of CDS. And that's where definitely an import connector would provide the extra value, but there's some level of workaround that you could apply. Cool. So I think we covered this slide. The last point actually I wanted to make is that this experience for querying data is consistent across all of the connectors that we expose in Power Query. The query capabilities and transforms are also the same. There's cases, of course, where you're dealing with backend that has less capabilities in terms of the ability to push down those queries. So in those cases, the Power Query engine, the mashup engine, will compensate and will run those operations locally at runtime. But not least, combining data across all of these data sources is just seamless as well. So you can easily connect to one of them and apply transforms, but you can also do multiple of them and then bring them all into a single view that then you can share, whether that is as part of a report in an analytics workflow or by loading that into an entity in CDS as part of the specific workflow we're talking about today. With that, let's talk specifically about the value that Power Query brings into CDS as an integration. That's the next slide that I have here. So I'm going to split this into two parts, what's available today, and then I'm going to demo that, and then we can talk a little bit about what's coming over the next few months. In terms of what's available today, we're putting out a first initial integration that allows users from the Power Apps portal. So I'm going to show that, but it's basically when you go to the entities tab in the Power Apps portal, and when you get the list of all the entities, you're going to be able to create a new entity based on external data sources. And that will take you through a get data and data preparation experience that's web-based, but you'll clearly recognize there the footprint of Power Query in terms of capabilities and also the user experience principles, the basic concepts, things like the query editor, the steps, and so on. So we're going to walk through that. This initial integration, we expose about 20 data sources today. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And a few data transforms. I think it's about 100 transforms right now. In comparison with our client or desktop integrations for Power Query, where we have about 75-something data sources and over 300 transforms, you might think this is very few. And I actually kind of agree with you because I'm so used to the good stuff in the clients, but we're going to be working towards closing that gap over time. And of course, it's more of a trade-off between versus the breadth of operations. So we're going to be filling those gaps, and we're definitely open to hearing from you guys as you play with it, what are the main gaps in terms of both data sources that you'd like to bring into CDS, as well as the data transfers that would allow you to do more meaningful stuff with that data before getting it loaded to CDS. Currently available as a preview feature, but it's not open to everyone yet. So what we ask you, if you're interested, is that you follow the link below. http://pqocds/pp, which stands for Power Query Online CDS Private Preview. So if you go to that link, you'll get asked a couple of questions, basically who you are, what organization you belong to, how many people do you expect will be trying out this preview, and then I will gather your email so that we will contact you with details for how to actually access the bits. We're trying to do this with a gradual ramp-up of users because we're kind of just getting started. It's a whole new integration for Power Query. It's actually Power Query running in the cloud. For those of you with more technical depth, we're actually doing all of the mashup execution and all of the backend execution on Azure, on the cloud. There's, of course, integration with the on-premises data gateway, which many of you will be familiar with from Power BI and also from Power Apps and Flow. That will allow you to also connect to on-prem data sources by installing that gateway. So with that, I think too many words. Let's actually go and see a demo.
Woohoo!
I'm going to switch to Edge. So what I'm looking at right now is the Power Apps portal. I'm going back to my Home tab. Note that I am actually on an environment where I have the ability to create databases. So this is an important piece. You can actually it's only on databases where you have that ability to create entities, so that if you try to use this integration in a different database or an environment where you don't have that right permissions, that right access, you're going to get an error. It's going to tell you need to create your own database for that. But within this experience, I'm going into the Common Data Service group here in the navigation pane, and I'm going to go into the Entities tab. So this is the list of entities that I have in this database. That's my DB1 database. There's a bunch of entities here that are standard. I've actually not populated any of these yet, but what I'm going to do, and what you probably notice now, is that there's this new drop-down menu that says New Entity. For some of you, actually, this will probably look today like just a regular button that says New Entity rather than a drop-down. Once we onboard you into this preview, you're going to see a few new options. The last option here is New Entities from Data. So this is actually the Power Query integration that I was referring to. So once I click into the option, we're going to take you into this new dialog. It's taking a little bit of time to load. There we go. So this is kind of a different form factor, but many of you would recognize here familiar aspects compared to the Get Data dialog that you're used to in other Power Query clients, like say Power BI Desktop. So you can see the data sources that we offer. I mentioned it's about 20 at this point, and there's a few categories where we split, so different form factor, but kind of the same categories. The first one is files. So we expose connectivity to different types of files, including Access databases, Excel workbooks, JSON, text, CSV files, XML, wide variety. For now, we're exposing SQL Server database, IBM DB2, and PostgreSQL. We plan to bring more data sources such as Oracle, MySQL, and so on board soon. But we'll also be interested to know which ones of those are actually higher priority for many of you guys. Of Azure connectivity, for now we expose SQL database and data warehouse. We have other things in desktop here as well, such as HD Insight Spark, DocumentDB, or as it's called now, Cosmos databases. So a few sources for us to be adding over time, but some of the most popular ones are already here, so that's something you can play with. Online services, we expose Salesforce objects, reports, ability to connect to SharePoint lists, Visual Studio Team Services connector, which is also available as a preview connector today in Power BI. So OData, SharePoint on-prem lists, and then the web connector, which for clarity here we split it into web.page to actually scrape data from HTML pages and HTML tables, and web APIs where you can actually hook up to REST APIs from the web. Blank query, so for many of you familiar with the M language, that's where you would go to actually write a new query from scratch. I'm going to actually use the OData connector today. So when I click OData, I'm taken into the next screen where I actually get to specify my connection settings, what OData feed URL I'm trying to connect to. We've embedded the gateway selection. By default, we'll try and use the cloud-based gateway, so no need for you to install an on-premises data gateway if you're connecting to a cloud-based or internet-facing data service or data endpoint, and the authentication or credentials type. So let's actually go and connect to my favorite feed, OData feed in the world, which is the Northwind OData feed. This is the B4 version of the OData B4 version of this feed. So I specify that link, and this is an internet-facing OData feed, so that I can just stick to not using a specific on-prem gateway. And then I get to pick the authentication kind or the credential type. For OData, we support anonymous, basic, and organizational account, or basically OAuth. In this case, the feed is publicly available, so it's an anonymous credential. And I'm going to click Next. So at this point, we're going to try and connect to that OData feed, and we're going to be calling out all the entities available within this feed, so you can select. Give it a little bit of time to catch up.
Well, it's catching up. I don't know if I understand Juan Alvaredo's question. So I could get you to look at it and read it out loud. And the reason I'm doing that is they can't hear me very well. And if I turn it on in the microphone or echo.
Sure. The question is if we're gonna add for CRM and Dynamics 365 operations in the future. So yeah, so these are connectors that we plan to support in the fullness of time. In both of these cases, actually, they are exposed as OData feed endpoints. So you might actually be able to connect to them already today through the OData connector, like I'm showing in this demo.
Can I just point out, that's exactly how we're connecting CRM and the AX connectivity for the end-to-end flow. We're using it. We have a few additional things that we do, but what we're using.
Marco Rosa, I think, has the same question, but for WordPress. Can you get you to read that? Is that way that people can hear it?
So the question is whether we have a Power Query connector for WordPress and WooCommerce. We don't have first-class connectors for these two services, but a couple of things. I would look into whether you can already connect through generic interfaces, as we were saying, REST APIs or data feeds, and/or you should also check out the custom connectors SDK that we recently released in the context of Power BI, which allows end users or ISVs to actually create connectors that wrap the calls to the underlying data source to actually allow you to plug those sources into Power Query. Currently, that custom connectors SDK, it's only available in Power BI and in Power BI Desktop, but we plan to expand support both in Power BI to support end-to-end scenarios. For example, refreshing that data in the Power BI service, most likely through the on-premises data gateway. And we also plan to open up these custom connectors SDK to all the other integrations where Power Query participates. Of course, the CDS integration would be one of those. So over the next few months, expect to also be able to leverage custom connectors that you create through our SDK and our extensibility model in the context of CDS.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yep. So I think the screen caught up, although it looks a little bit blurry, or is it just me? Okay, it's probably just me. I'm good now. So the next screen is basically exposing the list of entities that we detected in this OData feed, what in the Power BI UI terms you would call the navigator dialog. So here I can select specific tables and get a preview, categories, maybe employees or customers, and then I can actually load these entities or edit them. In this case, I'm actually going to pick multiple entities. By default, we only expose a single selection model, but you can go under display options, and there's an extra option that allows you to select multiple items. Once you click that option, you're going to see multiple checkboxes show up next to each entities, and you're going to be able to pick more than one entity or more than one table. Customers table. I'm also going to pick the orders table. And at this point, I could do two things. Well, I guess I could do three. First, I could cancel out if I'm scared and I want to walk away. Or I could click create. If I click create, we would go ahead and start creating two new custom entities, one for customers and one for orders in CDS. Or I could go into the edit option, which will allow me to apply extra transformations or mashups on top of these two tables that I've selected. Let's do that. Let's click edit. And that will take me into the query editing experience, the main data prep environment that we provide with Power Query. So you'll recognize, for those of you familiar with the client integrations, a few differences with the desktop integrations of Power Query. The main one might be the ribbon. So here we actually have a toolbar. This toolbar is slightly different, but it exposes many of the operations that you use and love in Power Query in the clients, things like choosing columns, things like using rows as headers, transposing, reversing rows, lots of different ways to filter data, removing top rows, bottom, alternating, keeping top, keeping bottom, removing duplicates, removing errors, removing blanks. We also provide the ability to combine queries, combine tables, merging, appending, also some column-specific operations. So for example, if I pick a subset of these columns, I could do things like columns. So let's go and pick a few of these columns. So we're going to pick just, let's actually go through choose columns. Orders table. So I'm actually going to pick the order IDs and the customer ID. And I think that will do it. Let's pick those two. Have a list of orders along with their customer IDs in the orders table. Now I'm going to go back to the customers table, and here I have additional information from each of the customers. So I have their customer ID, their company name, I have their contact name, and I also have things like their city and their also, let's actually go and pick also that column. Pick the country column, so we can right click and say remove the other columns. Now let's say that we wanted to apply a couple of additional data transforms here. We have a column for the contact name. Say that I actually wanted to split this into first name and last name. So I can go and do a split column operation. As you see, we provide column level transforms as well, things like split, replacing values, removing duplicates. So I can do a split column by delimiter. And I'm going to use the advanced mode so I can pick which delimiter to use. In this case, I'm going to use the space. And I'll split at the leftmost. So basically, I'll use the first token, the first word here as the first name, and everything else will become the last name. I know that's a simplification, but it will just serve to kind of illustrate the purpose that I can split a column into multiple. So now I have two columns. I'm going to rename the first one to first name and the second column to last name. I have a customers table that looks, but there's just one more column that I would like to add here, which is going to be the count of orders for each of these customers. So in order to do that, I'm going to do a merge operation. I'm going to do a merge queries, and I'm going to bring the select the second table, which is orders. And what we're going to do, we're going to merge by customer ID, and we're going to do a left outer join. So we'll basically keep all of the rows from a customer's table, and we'll only bring the match rows from the other table. So I get a warning here about combining data across multiple data sources, which I'm okay with. So I'm clicking continue to allow that operation. Now I have my new column with orders data, and I can go in and do something like expanding. But rather than that, what I would like to do is actually do an operation that would allow me to, example, I don't want to navigate there. So I would like to just extract the count. So to do that, you'll notice that we don't have yet the ability to create a custom column, but I could have done that through the formula bar to actually create that or extract the counts. The other thing that we don't have yet is the ability to aggregate nested data. So I'm actually going to leave it like this. I'll just leave it as a nested column because I notice also we're kind of running out of time. But I wanted to illustrate the point that you can apply transforms. You could combine data across multiple tables. And now at this point, we're going to go and load this table. Interestingly, we have two tables, but the orders one, I don't really want to load just yet. Using it as an intermediate artifact to actually be able to pull then the nested data into the customers table. So in the next screen, which is the screen that allows me to configure the load settings for these entities, I get to pick a few things. I can select a few different behaviors for load settings, whether to only load new or modified rows or reload all rows, which will be basically recreating the entity on a reload operation. And then I have entity-specific settings. So for customers, I definitely want to load this entity. And I can also modify the display name. I could provide a description. So let's say this is customers with count of orders. Specify the primary keys, which are relevant in the context of then building downstream references in Power Apps and CDS on top of this entity. To the orders table, in this case, I would like to not load this entity. So I'm going to uncheck that box. And basically at this point, what will happen when I click load is that we will go ahead and we will only load the customer's entity. So at this point, we are creating this entity. It's going to be a new custom entity that gets created. So at this point, we are running the final query that we generated through that query editor set of transforms that we applied. And we're going to be loading that entity as a custom entity in CDS and then populating it with the actual rows of data that come out of that operation. So with that, then you'll also be able to start building downstream artifacts on top of this entity. There's also a way for you to re-edit these queries if you need to. So from the database level context menu, you can also edit that. I think at this point, we can open it up for any other questions.
I think you're doing a good job on answering them, but if you could read Mike's question.
How are the data changes handled? So we basically exposed two ways today through this basic integration. The first one is we just reload all rows of data, or we actually recreate the entity, which includes schema changes as well through the Power Query ad hoc.
Yeah, so the question might be in the data integrator. In the data integrator, we have actually we'll soon have 3 options. We have 2 options right now. By default, what happens is you only get the data.
Can you make sure and sneak up right next to Miguel?
By default, what you get is only the data that has changed since the last time you synced. We basically keep a version record, or depends on the data source. Sometimes we keep a date timestamp. And so, for instance, if you have 10 records and you sync them initially, and then you add 2 more, you only sync the additional 2 records. We have the ability to rerun everything, so all 12, for instance. And then let's say that you did a 5, a 5, and a 5, and then the middle 5, for instance, most of them failed. You can choose to just go rerun that job that did the 5 if you're syncing on a every half hour, 5 minute, whatever basis. You'll be able to go in, and then in the future we'll be able to go find specific records that have failed and rerun those. So, but in general, the dynamic, we'll just sync the data that's changed by default.
All right, perfect. So if I could get you to turn off your microphone,
I actually had one more slide.
Oh, you have one more slide?
Yeah,
okay, go ahead.
I have. Not done yet. So just to recap on the integration, what's available today, what we walked through, an initial integration through the Power Apps App Maker portal to create custom entities with a set of about 20 data sources and transforms, about 100 of them. You can sign up today through that link we shared, aka.mesh pqocds.pp. Later this year, we'll have much more tight integration with CDS data integrator projects, as Lance was mentioning. We'll also provide the ability to map to standard entities, not just custom entities as we do today. And we will incrementally add support for new data sources and data transformations, primarily based on customer feedback on what's most relevant in the context of CDS data load. Last but not least, today we're in preview, but we plan to get to general availability of this Power Query integration before the end of this calendar year.
Outstanding. Get you just muted? Oh, yeah, outstanding. Okay, guys, so I want to thank you very much. Miguel and Lance, thank you for joining me. And also I wanted to announce the fact that the Power BI control is now live. It went live about 10 minutes ago. Lance was telling me IMing with the PM, Philip, who actually just released this. And next week, we're actually have Darshan on our webinar, and he's going to cover all the features that Power Apps has released since January. So again, announcement that the Power BI control for Power Apps is now live. It went live about 10 minutes ago, and we're going to cover that and everything else that they've released since January and next week. So thank you very much, guys, and we are clear.